Okay, so picking up from where we ran out of space last time, what I want to talk about now is the these theories that have been posited around. We spoke about Landis, European exceptionalism, Frank, that this is just a point, a cycle in the world economy. Um, the last one is this idea of a public sphere. A public sphere is a place in between citizens and the government where people can make demands of the government, right? This means public space, places like coffee shops where people could sit, discuss things, but also groups that make demands of government, but are the more than individuals, right? Pressure groups, political parties, charities, business groups, any group that makes demands of government. China didn't have that, right? They just had people and they had government. Um, Europe develops banking, it develops business, and the banking has enough money specifically and therefore clout to go between elites and the state and to advocate for the interests of commerce in the state, right? Now, what exactly is public space, which we need for this public sphere? This comes from this guy called Jürgen Habermas, right? Habermas's idea is that public space, public spheres, are necessary for the sort of unique European democracy capitalism that develops, right? So public sphere has these three key elements, right? One is the disregard of status, two is the domain of common concern, three is inclusivity. The public sphere doesn't suppose people are equal, it disregards the idea of inequality, right? Therefore, it allows people of different statuses to debate things. The second thing is developing a political domain which is of common concern, right? We all share interest in this, right? This is the beginnings of nationalism. We are all the people who need to sort this problem out together. This is crucial in the development of a political public sphere, right? The idea that we have shared interests. And the final thing is inclusivity. It can never close itself off, right? It's the most sort of inclusive of all spheres, because the issues are general, not only in the people who are impacted by them, but in their very nature, right? And that means everyone has to be able to participate. So if this exists in an institution, it has to be an accessible institution. And this is how the middle classes, right, through these public spaces and public concerns and places where we can discuss things that impact all of us, the middle class is able to force its way into politics, right? The final thing is this global economic crisis, right? In the late 16th century, silver was discovered in Zacatecas and Potosoy. Yeah. There was so much silver that it causes inflation, right? That means that money becomes worthless. If money is made out of silver, this is like finding a cave full of dollars. It makes money less valuable in Spain, right? However, Spain becomes so reliant on this that it doesn't do anything else, right? It doesn't start extracting resources or other things that are of inherent value. It just relies on this massive bucket of silver. So when this silver runs out, this causes a global economic crisis, which is evident that there was a global economic market, right? But you can look down here and see Spanish revenue spiking and dropping here, right? This massive drop when they run out of silver from their deposits. So this huge deposit of silver at once first boosts their economy, but they become so reliant on it they don't do anything else. Okay, so I wanted to also start off with feudal society. You'll hear feudalism sometimes compared to slavery, and I don't think that's an apt or a useful comparison to make, really, as a historian. It's more similar to indentured servitude, i.e. when you give labour in return for passage somewhere, but that's still not really a very functional, useful comparison. What feudal society is a way of structuring society around the exchange of labour for the use of land. What one does in feudal society as one is a peasant is In exchange for being allowed to use a lord's land, being allowed to farm on a lord's land, one promises that lord military service should he need it. So if the lord is called into battle, then you will go into battle with him, right? And your labor on his land, right? So if the lord has a field, you have to work on that field before you can work on your field. In return, you get a little bit of land which you can use to feed your family. You're entitled to protection, so if someone attacks you, he's going to defend you with the rest of you. That's right, you have to give him your military service. Justice, if somebody steals from you, you can go to the lord and he will make that right. And as I said, the right to cultivate certain fields to maintain subsistence. So we talked a little bit here about warfare just then, and the idea that most soldiers were not professional soldiers, right? Now we're very used to people joining the military as a job, but in the early part of our course, or just before our course, fighting was something that any able-bodied man would do, sometimes women as well. As soon as a war broke out, armies would be raised from the citizen population, and those armies would be sent out to fight with very little in the way of training or equipment, right? You grabbed the biggest stick or the spikiest pole that you had. Maybe you had a sword, maybe you had an axe, maybe you had a scythe, and off you went with all the people who lived around you, and you did your best to kill the people who were trying to kill you before they could kill you. What the lords do is they sort of dress up like tin men in their suits of armor, right? And this is where we see things like heraldry and the idea of nobility. The nobles are people who, their relationship with the king gives them all these special rights and privileges, because when the king needs them, they will bring an army, right? And so the way they get status is by showing their bravery. And they do that with things like crests, shields, and flags, which show who they are on the battlefield. And then they ride out in the battlefield and they challenge other nobles on the other side and they fight. This type of warfare is very individual, right? It relies on lances and swords and maybe bows and arrows. But this feudal method of fighting is based on the bravery of the individual lord. What undermines this is the invention of musketry. It's all very good riding into the middle of a battlefield and bravely challenging some other noble to a duel, but if he can shoot you from 100 yards away, you're screwed, right? It doesn't matter how brave you are. And so what you need with muskets is, instead of a rabble of peasants who don't know what they're doing, is a professionally trained and drilled military, guys like this, who do know what they're doing, right? Guys who can load their muskets and shoot the people who are trying to shoot them more quickly, right? And so we move from a feudal system which has soldiers as anybody who can lift a stick, to a professional military, which in turn undermines feudalism, right? Because part of what you give in feudalism is your labor, and what you get is land. Now, if you can't give yourself in the military, then you might not get the land. And that undermines the whole system. And the whole system is based on lords raising armies and peasants being in armies and kings commanding the armies. Next up is the printing press, which I'm going to record in another video.